it's hard to explain, but it was like I was sitting in it's like a dark well for a really long time, and suddenly someone broke through the wall of the well, and then there was a bunch of light everywhere.
Mm.
Um, so after that second year of that trip, I was really able to let go a lot of the anger, the resentment, a lot of the grief I've been holding on to. And after that point, it was easier for me to open up. And on the other side of that,
Thank you so much again, Emily, for meeting with us today to interview for the Untangling Project. Let's go and start with the basics. Like, where were you born? What was the city like where you were born in?
so I was born in Shawnee Mission, Kansas. We only stayed there for I think a couple of years before moving down to Austin, Texas, and that's where I grew up.
How old were you when you moved to Austin?
2 or 3.
Oh, wow. Pretty young. What was it like growing up in Austin?
I had a lot of really good childhood friends. So I have a lot of really good memories of uh, spending time with friends. Our elementary school is very small, and so I had a lot of support from teachers as well.
How was your school like pretty diverse, your friend group? Like, what was the, ethnic makeup of your community like?
Preschool was very white centered, but moving into elementary school and then for most of my schools afterward, very, very diverse. My friend group is kind of split to mostly white and Asian is the big portion of it.
Let's move more into how you relate to your Asian American identity. Yeah, ethnically, what do you identify as?
Ethnically, I identify as half Vietnamese and half white. How I share that depends on the person I'm talking to, for sure.
Growing up, you mentioned, correct me if I'm wrong, that you were mentioning you were relating more to your dad's side, like the white, whether that's in cuisine or family members. And then around like fifth grade, you're like, all right, well, I want to get more in touch with the Vietnamese side of me. How did you relate to your mom during those times, if you can recall?
My parents had a really complicated divorce, and for a really long time, I was very angry with my mom for that. Because they had kept any of the details from me. So any conflict or anything I didn't see. And so for me, it was like I saw one argument. And then after that, they separated. My dad at the time was still talking, like he still loves my mom and this. And I recognize now my mom got a lot of her own pain, but at that time, she never shared that. And then being a single working mom, she wasn't around a lot. So it was really difficult for me to relate to her. And so I think part of it in that sense was just naturally I felt like my dad was more supportive and would spend more time with him. Finding the connection again to my family in general, just because of the nature of some of the family deaths and things, at the time, I really didn't get any family support through grief. It pretty much all came from my friends and my teachers in the background. But they never really got it from my parents at that time. It was, especially with my mom, was how can I find my way back to that, I think.
For sure, for sure. I'm so glad you had a support system to manage that grief. How did your mom and dad, or even your mom's side of the family, process grief? Did they at all, or at least what you can recall?
Yeah. So we had multiple different situations going on here. So first, my mom's fiance at the time had taken his own life. And so that was really complicated in the sense that she was grieving and I think just so wrapped up in her grief that I didn't really get a lot of that. And then my dad didn't like the guy in the first place, so he wasn't really present for that grief. And so for that one in particular, I never really connected with my family a whole lot about that part of grief. And so that one was really something I really laid onto my friends and my teachers for. And then not long after that, my uncle's youngest child died. Unexplained infant death.
Wow.
But I remember he's been through a really long time. We with that and with my mom's fiance's death, both are like really complicated grief, and so there was a lot of the family was always there to support. I remember my relatives are always, checking in on me, and that when they're around, really leaning on each other or offering support for each other. So I never felt, when I was with them, and I felt alone, but they all live kind of around the country, so they weren't there on the daily. Uh, but I do remember it, looking back at instance where they, behind the scenes, they really stepped up.
Yeah, for sure.
But everyone in the family, I think, had the tendency to kind of internalize and really hold it in. So it was hard, for a while, it was hard to express my grief.
So noticing a lot of your family members tend to internalize their grief as they're processing through that. Yeah, and at this time, like you said, you escaped more to reading so you can find these connection points back to your family members. Did that affect your relationship with your mom?
I think it took a while. For me, there was a lot of, I guess, internal kind of processing to go through, just because there was so much grief to work through, and then both being taught to internalize. And at that time, I had on some level, I think, been able to recognize that my mom was going through a lot. But at the time, she was still single and still working hard, and then adding grief on that. So from a young age, I've learned to kind of be fairly independent. My brother's 5 years younger than me, so after a while, like, I would be a caretaker for him a lot.
Wow.
So yeah, I wouldn't say I was very emotionally close with her, but until maybe around high school, middle of high school, that I was really able to work through my own stuff and kind of reach out back to her at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said that was around high school, and was that a decision that you made? You're like, I want to get closer to my mom, or yeah.
I think it was a combination of things that kind of led us to becoming closer. That I had my own complicated grief, and for me, a lot of that manifested as anger. So I had a lot of my own work through that. And about the same time, I was starting to discover what sexual and gender identity was, because those are also things that my family never explicitly talked about. So they were, and at that time, that was, again, internalizing, something I was really trying to figure out on my own. And around that time, I tried coming out to my parents, or at least to my mom first. And by this time, we'd met my stepdad, so I met him as well. It did not go well the first couple of times. Not explicitly, like, she was never, oh, I'm going to disown you or violent or anything like that. But it was a lot of, are you sure? Why does this matter to you so much? When I started really getting into, like, the GSA and really identifying with my peers in that way. And at that point, it felt, because I'd been struggling with, like, identity issues for so long, it was really hard to have her question that. She, I think, contributed to a lot of my disconnect with her. And then about sophomore, junior year of high school, I had, been forced to go on to this retreat trip for a couple of years. One that they had said that I had to go to. It was about a week long in the summer, went up to the mountains. And the second year of doing that, I don't really know what else to call it other than maybe like a breakthrough, or it's hard to explain, but it was like I was sitting in a dark well for a really long time, and suddenly someone broke through the wall of the well, and then there was a bunch of light everywhere. So after that second year of that trip, I was really able to let go a lot of the anger, the resentment, a lot of the grief I've been holding on to. And after that point, it was easier for me to open up. And on the other side of that, my mom had been, going through her own things, and she'd been able to work through, like, with the gender and sexual identity things. Really, she'd been learning a lot and opening up a lot more to different things. And so I think it was nice timing in this. Wow. I was ready to open up, and she was ready to receive.
It's okay. So, Mom, can you share with me a memorable moment with your mom, or one that you hold really close?
I have a few, I think, different memories of just kind of moments in between, or little moments of things. I think one of my biggest ones was, when did that come out? Around when I graduated high school, I think. The movie Coco came out, and I was immediately obsessed. I love musicals, so
Me too. Oh,
I remember that was actually the first movie I ever bought with my own money, because I remember thinking, my mom has to see this movie. Have to see this movie. I kind of bullied her into like spending an evening with me. But I showed her the movie, and I remember as soon as the credits started rolling, she had like burst into tears and started telling me, really telling me about her grandmother and what growing up with her grandmother was like, and the importance of keeping people's memories alive when they go, and what that means in Vietnamese culture. And I think that was really that period of, I guess, the Kickstarter of, oh, now we've been able to really talk about our history.
what do you hope for your mom, in her own journey now?
I mean, I think my mom's come a really, really long way from where she was. The beauty of being very self-aware very early on is I've been able to see that in both my parents. So they've come from a very closed off place and still going, but continuing to open up more and to be more, I guess, self-aware and aware of the world around them. And moving forward, I mean, I certainly hope my mom continues with that. And I'm also hoping she actually retires. She's very much a people pleaser type and works too hard, and said she would retire, and she is not retiring. And a little bit of selfishness too. I've noticed nowadays, especially being closer to her, I get my own little moments of resentment when she's constantly on calls. So it's hard because I recognize too that she works in the medical field, and for most of these cases, someone's life is at stake. So you can't feel mad at these people and be like, oh, just hang up already. Screw them. That's kind of important.
Yeah.
So recognizing that in myself and saying she needs to retire for her own sake, but also so I have more time with her while she's here.
Oh, that's really cool. How often do y'all see each other?
As of right now, every day.
Oh, that's really cool. Wait a minute. Yeah, every day.
I still live in the house.
Oh, yeah,
I still live in the house.
great. For some reason, I thought you were like in another city.
I was briefly, and then during COVID, I came back because I graduated from my undergrad during COVID. So it's been difficult trying to get back into that. Now I'm finishing up a master's program, but I will probably be moving out within the next year. So the everyday check-ins will be much less frequent at that point.
For sure. Yeah, I can understand the desire and urgency to be like, Mom, get off that whatever call, I'm here now. That's so awesome. That's really great. I think that says a lot about how you feel about her, and it shares how much you just really want to be closer to her. And that's really beautiful. Is there something that you have always wanted your mom to say or express to you or connect with you in a certain way that hasn't happened yet? Or yeah.
There are certainly things, and it's hard for me to admit this a little bit, just because everyone loves my mom so much, and recommend, like, she's been through a lot. She's a really great person. And so sometimes it's hard to acknowledge that there is still a lot of resentment and pain that was there that I've been letting go, and I mostly let go. But at some point, I think I do need to have a conversation with her about those things. And I don't necessarily need an apology, but validation, I think, from her in that, but also recognizing that I haven't expressed those things to her. So
do you have any advice for mothers and daughters and how they can understand each other more and, grow closer, and based on your experiences?
I think my biggest advice is always never shut down the communication. That was such a big thing for me and my mom, because part of that disconnect for us was I never communicated with her, and she didn't reach out as much because I set up that wall. And so for other mothers, daughters, other families, never, I'd say never shut down that communication and be open to hearing people's stories. I think there's a lot we can learn from recognizing it's okay for me to be angry that you did this, but it's also not solely your fault because this was your trauma or the way you were raised. And trauma is a lot to work through.
How do you and your mom experience like physical touch? Is that like what aspect is that in y'all's relationship?
So in terms of physical touch, neither of us are very touchy people. That's not really how affection has ever really been expressed in our family. Like when I go to my grandparents, it's always you bow to them. And even more Americanized people in the family, it's a very awkward hug, or it's like a military hug where it's like really hard and you let go of about 3 seconds. So she and I have never really been super touchy people, but I guess our version of physical affection has always been food. Showing me how, showing me how to cook. Most of our conversations tend to happen in the kitchen.